Hello and welcome. My name is Dan Meyer. I'm editor-in-chief of RCR Wireless News. Thanks for joining us today. Today I'll be joined by Bill Ho, who is principal analyst at 556 Ventures. Hey Bill, how you doing?
Well, thanks.
Great. And also we'll be joined by Jeff Silva, who will be with us in voice only. Jeff, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Sure, glad to be here.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Well, the topic today is we're going to talk a little bit about the spectrum, I guess, spectrum issues going on in the country, kind of about spectrum in general. We did a webinar last week on this topic that you can check out on the RCR Wireless site, where we use some PowerPoints and a little more in depth there on the topic. So please feel free to check that one out. We also came out with a report here at RCR last week as well on the topic, so you can download that from the rcrwireless.com site. But the point today is to kind of, I guess, kind of follow up on some of the discussions we've had on the topic of spectrum, a little more interactive here with us able to kind of more interact with each other. So I guess one thing I want to start off with, maybe with Bill, is, and this is something I know we talked about a bit on the webinar, but I guess get your general overview of kind of where we are spectrum-wise in the country. I know we kind of talked a bit about where the carriers are in their spectrum holdings. So maybe I guess get from you your view on kind of where carriers are in terms of their current spectrum positions.
The two big guys probably are in the best position from a holistic spectrum portfolio standpoint, simply because they dominate in the low band, and due to that capability, they can offer geographic coverage. So if you look at coverage maps for Verizon and AT&T, they have vastly larger coverage, and it's basically because of the low band. They also have good holdings in the other bands as well, PCS, AWS, and assorted others. And to Sprint and T-Mobile's credit, they also have low band, and they're I guess they're clawing back with some low band and putting that stuff in service. Recently, the the A band for 700 for T-Mobile. Once that's done, and then with Sprint, they've got to get that rebanding all said and done, and also they're implementing 800 on their former IDEN spectrum. So I guess it is in a nutshell that low band really rules the day for the big two, but the other stuff that the other competitors have are working well, but it can also be better.
Yeah, and it does seem like that's kind of the big key right now. Is there's a lot of discussion around low band spectrum. I know obviously there's an incentive auction coming up here middle of next year, which will provide some more of that low band spectrum to the market. But that still seems to be kind of what we're looking at. Is there is perhaps that benefit of having low band spectrum? I know carriers are trying to get some more of it. That seems to be a bit of a challenge. I know maybe from Jeff, I guess get your point of view on. I know with the national broadband plan, the government's looking to get a lot more spectrum out there. I think at one point they wanted to get 500 megahertz of new spectrum out there, and obviously that's a lot of spectrum. Has to come from a lot of different places. I guess how's the government doing? I guess in getting spectrum out there. Your views, kind of on the Washington Insider view of how that's happening, and I guess is there any sort of pressure on the government to get, to meet that target, and maybe even more specifically to get maybe more low band spectrum, because that does seem to be perhaps that prime real estate for carriers to really be able to compete and offer good services.
Sure, Dan. Yeah, the FCC, actually the entire government, because NTIA works on this as well and has input from industry. I think that right now it's going to come in fits and starts, and it's going to require a combination of different approaches. They've got the traditional auctions. They have the HBlock. They're getting ready to get some rules together on the AWS3 auction at the March 31st meeting, and they're working on incentive auction rules. But they're also looking on greater sharing.
Mm-hmm.
They also have to determine what the split is between licensed and unlicensed spectrum.
Yeah.
And they have to do all of that within the context of competition policy, and that's where it gets a little tricky, because one of the big policy issues that's being debated right now is to whether the spectrum screen should be revised in a way that would give greater weight to spectrum in the low band, that is below 1 gigahertz, greater than spectrum above 1 gigahertz. And of course, Verizon and AT&T control the lion's share of spectrum below 1 gigahertz. And but at the same time, they're pressing the FCC to include 2.5 gigahertz spectrum, the broadband radio service, and I think educational broadband service within the screen. And I think what the FCC would like to do is bring some clarity to the spectrum screen in advance of the AWS-3 and the incentive auctions. And so I think a lot of folks are going to be watching that carefully, in coming weeks, since they may go forward with some guidance on what they're going to do on the spectrum screen, perhaps in the May timeframe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me just interject. I echo that. That I think that's a huge thing that the FCC is going to I guess, weigh in on, because if you do low band, then it kind of hampers AT&T and Verizon's position as they go into this 600 megahertz auctions. But if you weight that, then it'll hamper them, right? But if you also include the whole portfolio, which Verizon and AT&T, Verizon really, I don't know about AT&T, but I'm sure the same thing, is because of the vast holdings of 2.5 BRS EBS stuff. And Sprint would look like they would be hampered if there were any rules. So I think that's where Sprint's looking for, is to weight the different spectrum bands, of which, if you have more low band, then there's more weight or less weight associated with it. It depends on which way, but it's obviously a positioning right now. It'll be really interesting to see what the FCC rules on the spectrum screen.
Yeah, it does seem like, obviously Sprint is in a bit of a bind here, because they are trying to, on one hand, promote their vast spectrum holdings and how it will power their Sprint Spark plan, by saying, we've got all the spectrum, we can do all this great speed with it. But at the same time, they are trying to, I guess, on the regulatory side, perhaps not be so boastful about the benefits of the 2.5 spectrum. And so, try to, again, if that weighting issue comes into play, that could be perhaps a detriment to them. But again, I think everybody knows or realizes that there is differences in the spectrum, but it's, again, that is so much spectrum that they have. I mean, they have probably more 2.5 than the other carriers have in all their spectrum holdings together. So to not include that, or how you include that, I guess, is a challenge. And maybe from Jeff, I mean, are you sensing in Washington that weighting aspect, it seems like it is mostly going to be a decision that's going to impact Sprint. Well, it'll impact everybody, but it does seem like that 2.5 seems to be a big part of it. And is there any sense, I guess, at this point, at how that might turn out? I mean, what's your view on how that's being handled at the FCC?
It's hard to say. There have been no nuggets about what the FCC is going to do. It's been clear that they've been looking at the weighting issue for a while, and nothing's changed insofar as the entities that control the low band. And it may well be, it could come down to splitting the baby. It could well be that the FCC does weight the below 1 gigahertz spectrum greater than other spectrum. Then the question will be, to what degree do they weight it greater? And it could be as well that they do include, the 2.5 BRS EBS spectrum as well. It could be a mix of both. That a decision like that would not surprise me. And an interesting issue, if the FCC does include the 2.5 gigahertz in the spectrum screen, right now the SoftBank Sprint's efforts to acquire T-Mobile, have hit a roadblock here in Washington insofar as competition policy and keeping the national framework at 4 carriers. But one can see that it could become even more complicated to include the 2.5 in the spectrum screen, insofar as their designs on T-Mobile going forward. It would add another layer of complication to that.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, that could be a bit of a challenge for them. I mean, I guess there's always, I know during our webinar we did last week, there were some questions that came in from people, and there's, someone had mentioned that, I guess during the 700 megahertz auction, that was in 2008, that was kind of a big watershed moment. A lot of money was raised, but during that auction, it did seem like Sprint and T-Mobile didn't participate in that auction, and so and for them to now come back and kind of be complaining about carriers having too much below 1 gigahertz spectrum. It did seem like they did have an opportunity to get some, but they chose not to. Maybe from Bill, I mean, do you think that impacts at all their argument about now coming back and saying, hey, we need to kind of keep the sub 1 gigahertz guys from or sub 1 gigahertz band kind of separate from the other spectrum? Do you think that at all impacts their argument in this case?
Yeah, sure. I think that if you probably there's some public statements from AT&T and Verizon that have used those
Yeah, sure.
same arguments. And I think going back, everything is about positioning right now and putting forward the right arguments for each carrier's position. So if you rewind back to auction, I think it was 73, was it?
Yeah,
auction 66 AWS, 73 was 700, and it was probably 2 years within of each other. And T-Mobile was just coming off a vast expenditure for capex to buy that spectrum. So to raise more money, I don't know. I mean, it's really a timeline within corporate where you talk to the German DT franchise and say, "What? You want more spectrum? We just gave you all this money." So that could be in that timeline of discussion as well. And Sprint, I don't know. I think that they were looking at 2.5, and they were also working with their cable partners back in auction 66. So it's hard to say, unless you actually talk to the spectrum planners. Then
sure, yeah. And obviously, like you said, it was a very rapid. It was 2006 for the AWS auction, 2008 for the 700 megahertz. So you're right, it was 2 years. I think in auction 66 there for the AWS spectrum, T-Mobile spent I think $4 billion there. So to come back and spend, to go back to Germany and ask for more money again for another auction would be probably a little difficult at that time. And at that time, T-Mobile wasn't as successful as we've seen them over the past year either. So obviously, raising that kind of money that rapidly would be a bit of a challenge.
And if you think also the relative pockets are deeper at AT&T and Verizon than T-Mobile and Sprint. So that could have a factor as well. So if you take a look at AWS and 700, both AT&T and Verizon played in both auctions. They've got deeper pockets.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, I guess with the HBlock, I guess maybe let's touch a bit on the HBlock. I know during the webinar we didn't get much time to talk about the HBlock, which just finished up a couple weeks ago. It was kind of, I guess, the first of the trio of auctions that were kind of going to be planned over the next 18 months or so. Maybe from Jeff, I guess, what's your general view of the success of the HBlock auction? I mean, obviously, it was a unique auction that was only 10 megahertz of spectrum. It was kind of high up in the 1.9 band. I guess what's the general view in Washington of the success of that auction, and maybe your view of kind of, I guess, how that process kind of went about?
Yeah, Dan, there's kind of there are mixed views on that auction. On the one hand, if you look at the fact that there hadn't been a major auction, this wasn't a major auction, but there had been a drought auction-wise since 2008. So in that sense, they were able to hold an auction and bring in, what was it, 1.5? They
1.5 billion
hit the reserve. So on that level, it was a step forward. However, the fact that the picture was muddled by the fact that Sprint decided not to bid, which likely would have brought in more receipts to the U.S. government for that spectrum, and the fact that that Dish's bid involved some regulatory relief insofar as some of the build out and some of the flexible band plan
Yeah.
allowances made by the FCC. There's some thought as well. Commissioner Rosenworcel at the FCC had felt that if HBlock had been combined with another block, they would have been able to raise more money. But again, it was kind of a difficult position because I think the FCC was anxious and the industry was anxious to see more spectrum come in to the market. Now, and there are still others that felt that that HBlock was more of a retail sale in the sense that the price was set and there was just one serious bidder for all practical purposes, and that was Dish. And so there's been some criticism of the handling of the auction on that basis. You're not going to please everybody, but I think going forward, I think the FCC is going to look at the experience, what happened in HBlock, and actually that'll be one of a large number of factors and variables that they'll consider in going forward with the AW and also conducting the auctions themselves as well. And again, all this, there's a lot of moving parts. You've got the spectrum screen, and you've got kind of the global policy view of competition policy. So all this, there are several moving parts, and they have to be, and then the auctions have to be looked at and crafted within kind of a broader context.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. I mean, they're definitely complicated procedures that they have to do. I mean, again, like you said, you can't please everybody, but perhaps at the end of the day, when you don't please everybody, that's probably the right decision on what's being made. But yeah, it did seem like HBlock was unique and perhaps should not be a precursor or thought of as a link to what's going to happen going forward. But maybe, I guess, from you, Bill, I guess maybe what was your general thoughts on HBlock? I mean, obviously, it wasn't a huge surprise to a lot of people, but what was your general view on that auction?
HBlock, I think serious bidders should have been two that effectively used it, Sprint and Dish. Sprint obviously has spectrum in the G block that was contiguous to it, and so logic said that if Sprint wanted to have contiguous spectrum, then they're rolling out their LTE on that G block, and if you add another 5 megahertz, then they would have 10 to serve up their LTE would add more capacity and speed. So that's logic, but Sprint threw that logic out, and I think I read where there was some good logic where they weren't going to go after it, and the reason, at least this was reported, was because they didn't have the time to do that, to wait for clearing and actually getting the ecosystem in place. They can afford to wait for it because their LTE future is really in Spark and that 2.5 stuff. Yeah. So it's just an interim measure for that G block, their 5x5 LTE, and that makes all the sense in the world to forego that spectrum because that'll take a couple of years to get it going and to develop that ecosystem. Let's concentrate all our capital to the BRS, the EBS stuff, and deploying 800 and building out a national network. So that makes all the sense in the world to save that money there. And then with Dish, even though they still have it, they are wealthy from a portfolio standpoint. But rubber meets the road when they have to deploy, and if it's going to be national or even some markets, they really have to partner with, because everybody knows it takes a lot of capex to build a network from the ground up, and who's out there logically to help them build out that spectrum. It's really Sprint and T-Mobile right now. I think in public comments, I haven't heard AT&T and Verizon, but we never know because things change, and secondhand aftermarket spectrum deals can come and Dish can sell it all.
Yeah, I think that's a topic we'll touch on a bit, a secondary market at some point too. But yeah, I guess I mean, does this make Dish a player in the space, or how much of a player are they? I mean, obviously, it sounds like again, it does take a lot of money to get involved. So they haven't really. I mean, they've talked the talk like they want to get involved in this, but Charlie Ergen has definitely not moved too forward with that. I mean, what's your general view now? Is Dish a player now, or are they just going to be a spectrum holder for a while until they do a partnership?
I think personally, maybe Jeff can weigh in also, that because they own so much spectrum, they are a player by default. Okay. It's just a matter of building out the ecosystem and who will help shoulder that building out of the ecosystem for devices, chips, and things like that. And then another one is the band associated with that. That's yet another band that you have to create in 3GPP to support and all that stuff. But it's formidable spectrum. So they are a player by default, and it's just a matter of who will be their partner, who will they partner with to get it up and running eventually. And because everybody's talking about Star for Spectrum, and they've got it. Yeah.
All right, so yeah, I guess maybe Jeff, I know you're talking a bit about Dish, kind of where they're viewed there. Maybe get your view on Dish and perhaps even some other spectrum holders there up and kind of that have spectrum in their hands right now, or at least trying to get spectrum in their hands.
Yeah, sure, Dan. Yeah, the Dish has been kind of an interesting entity in Washington. I'm not. I think Washington doesn't have any better idea than the rest of the country about what their plans are, and I think Charlie keeps a number of balls in the air all the time, and but. As Bill was saying, they are a player by default. But what I will say, at some point, I think their window, is narrowing. I think it's narrowed in the past 12 months as to, how, from their point of view, best monetize it, because you had the the Sprint or the SoftBank Sprint deal, the Sprint Clearwire deal, and I think given competition policy as it stands today, I think Dish would be limited really to partnering either with T-Mobile and perhaps Sprint, but any sort of partnership with Sprint would help. It would seem to help Dish a lot more than it would help Sprint. Sprint's looking for market share, and so that's sort of so we don't know. And let's not forget, LightSquare is still out there. They have or trying to retain, and there's been some positive signals from their bankruptcy proceeding, and they had a wholesale model that I assume that if they emerge from bankruptcy, they still plan to pursue, and so that could be another source of spectrum going forward. But again, it would be if they're sticking to their original plan, it would be more wholesale, and of course, the way the rules were written, there was kind of like a mother may I, provision for AT&T and Verizon, in those rules. So if either of those two companies wanted to lease spectrum from LightSquare, they would have to get run it by the FCC first. On that, so that is still out there as well, and it's important to note that that all of these, it's hard to tell which one is going to be most meaningful, because a big X factor in all of this is we don't know to what extent how successful the incentive auction will be. So we don't know what that's going to net, and so spectrum wise, so it could well be that the AWS-3 auction in hindsight may turn out to be even more significant It's just really hard to tell. There's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, obviously the incentive auction is going to be that is definitely going to be a tricky proposition. I think we'll touch on that a bit here too. But yeah, I think it does seem like with LightSquare and the LightSquare issue, which has been going on for years and years, it seemed like that was almost one of the first attempts by the FCC under Janikowski to kind of really get new spectrum out there. I mean, he almost seemed like they tried to fast track that deal through, and then obviously the GPS community came in and voiced their opinions and kind of shut that down. But yeah, the LightSquare spectrum is still sitting out there. At least some of it's got to be, can be used, it seems, for wireless services. It's just a matter of how you're going to work that through bankruptcy. And obviously, the FCC has a bit of a history when it comes to bankrupt companies as well, when it comes to, looking back at NextWave and other companies too. So there's a lot of tricky propositions there for the FCC with LightSquare. But with Dish, I mean, if they can get their hands on some spectrum and if they're going to, with more spectrum and partner with Sprint, I think it'd be nothing better, at least from a reporter point of view, than watching Masayoshi-san and Charlie Ergen work together on trying to put some sort of agreement together. Those are two probably biggest egos in the industry. So seeing those two work together would be kind of fun. But I don't know. But yeah, I guess see how that plays out. But I guess looking forward to AWS3, there has been some talk the past week or so from carriers about I guess maybe some rumors coming out about some rulemaking there. I know, Jeff, you mentioned that a little earlier about some potential rulemaking on that. What's the view on when that's expected to come out, and maybe what those rules perhaps might even be?
Okay, so on the AWS3, I believe the FCC has it on their agenda for the the March 31st meeting. So so we'll have more clarity on AWS3, in a couple weeks here. And then I believe also, not to be overlooked, I think at the same meeting, the FCC will be holding a vote on 5 gigahertz, unlicensed spectrum. Yeah. So that's significant. And perhaps in April, the FCC may go forward with an initiative on the 3.5 gigahertz. I think it's microcell.
Yeah, for small cells.
Yeah. And then that'll be April, and then in May, the May time frame, what we may see is something from the FCC on the incentive auction framework, and either before the incentive auction framework comes out or simultaneous, with that in May, we may have guidance from the FCC on the spectrum screen as well. Again, the intention is to give all prospective bidders as much information on the spectrum screen in advance, of the upcoming auctions. It's a little tricky what the sequencing will be for all that, but so there's going to be a lot of activity, this spring and beyond on the spectrum front, and then, in the same time frame, we should get more clarity on the LightSquare bankruptcy proceeding as well. And I think, with all those in play, that could in turn, impact, what Dish does going forward. So a lot of moving parts, and it could turn out any number of ways going forward. But the rest of the year is going to be very active on the spectrum policy front.
Yeah. I guess maybe from Bill, what's your view on how carriers may react to all these various pieces that are going to start coming up? And obviously, AWS3 is going to be big. That's going to impact incentive auction, the weighting issue. Carriers really have to kind of plan their next move carefully here, it seems like.
Yeah, I think that what we saw yesterday from the AT&T blog VP of Regulatory, Joe Marsh, applauded it. I think also Verizon applauded it. And then sure enough, T-Mobile said, we don't necessarily agree with it.
Yes,
so it's a war. It's all positioning, and whoever has the good argument or the better lobbyist or not really a lobbyist for FCC, but you know, the logic and the argument and the soundness of that argument should rule the day in terms of going that direction. So, you know, I don't have any visibility on the regulatory stuff that Jeff has. So it would be interesting to hear, to see actually what becomes of it, and you know, feel for the FCC trying to be all things to all people, be the most fair and for the public good. But as far as planning, yeah, I think that's within the corporate strategy, is to look at spectrum, because it's all strategic assets, and to acquire more strategic assets is kind of the name of the game. So planning well ahead, and that's why if you listen to investor conferences, they always talk about, what's your position like for capex and capital for upcoming auctions? So, yep. You know, big part of it is certainly the money to go up and maybe bid big.
Yeah, and obviously that connects too. I mean, I know people have been asking Verizon about their AWS plans, how they're going to roll that out, and that obviously directly impacts what their capex is going to be as well. I mean, they've got the spectrum already. They've talked about, you know, rolling that out more and more, so that's going to perhaps keep their capex maybe a little at higher levels than they were expecting it to be. I know, you know, I think early last year they were talking longer term at kind of rolling down some of their capex into 2014 once 700 megahertz got rolled out for the most part. But all of a sudden, with this need to roll out more AWS to support their LTE network, it seems like capex spending for them, at least in the near term, is going to be at that same, probably at that same level for the most part, until they can really start rolling it back. So yeah, it does seem like that. You know, having that spectrum does equate to, if you're going to put it into play, you've got to spend some money too.
Yeah, looking ahead, I mean, just to interject on spectrum, on the near-term stuff, I think we're going to be, the consumer is going to be the beneficiary of it. So we've been covering a topic called carrier aggregation for the longest time, for many years, right? And I think we'll see, actually, we're probably seeing the fruits of it in certain markets already. And we'll see that, and it'll be the speed positioning. I think I and several other people have talked about it, and that's what Sprint is putting the, you know, throwing their hat in the ring and saying where this is going to be a speed king, even though T-Mobile and Verizon and AT&T are kind of going at the edges on each other. But we know that carrier aggregation is basically putting together disparate spectrum, whether it's contiguous or not contiguous, whether it's the same band or other band. That's kind of going to be it in the future, to use existing stuff, and that goes towards refarming into giving us, you know, the good consumer, a faster experience and a better latency experience.
Yeah, and also the refarming, yeah, and the refarming part's a big part of it too. I mean, I know we touched about it on the webinar, but I mean, that's going to be a big part of this, because obviously carriers are already talking about refarming their 2G spectrum, obviously, but even some of their 3G spectrum, PCS bands and whatnot to support LTE. So that's a tricky proposition in itself, trying to get that worked out, because again, that's moving customers, and you know, you don't want to lose customers and move them too quickly. So that's a whole marketing angle that needs to be tackled too.
I think looking ahead, at least for the devices, we're going to, because of the constant turnover in devices, whenever you bring in new technology, there's going to be built into new devices. So that's going to be another piece of it. You know, if you want faster speed, you're going to have to upgrade your device, your tablet, or your smartphone to realize those fast speeds. Good for, you know, the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, now maybe touch a bit about maybe off the auctions for a second. I mean, obviously, incentive auction will be a big one that's coming up. That'll take, you know, that could be a 5-hour discussion there. But we don't have this go too much longer. But I guess, Jeff, maybe gets from your point of view, you kind of brought up that, you know, in the next FCC meeting they're going to have in March, there is talk about some the unlicensed spectrum, the 5 gigahertz band. I guess, you know, that there's always that you know, a need to get more unlicensed spectrum out there. I mean, the 2.4, which has kind of been supporting Wi-Fi for the most part, has been is being used pretty thoroughly, it seems like, in a lot of areas. Is the FCC putting a lot more focus, do you think, on that unlicensed spectrum band? And I guess what's the support coming, I guess, across the policy range when it comes to more spectrum for the unlicensed uses?
Yeah, I think they've got to clearly they can see that you know, in the wireless space, that there needs to be a mix of licensed and unlicensed spectrum. And I think they're putting a lot of time and a lot of effort, you know, into that. Even in the incentive auction, not it's still an open question, though it gets debated a lot in town here. To what extent should, any spectrum, whatever spectrum is recovered from broadcasters, should that be made available for unlicensed? I mean, most will be for licensed, but there's a lot of debate, and I'm sure it will be renewed. It's kind of settled down, and I think when they're looking at spectrum policy, they're taking a very holistic approach insofar as they're looking at transactions, spectrum creation by auction, and what are the rules, and opportunities for sharing what's, whether government spectrum can be shared or reallocated more in the future. And that's a very tough nut to crack there. There was, a significant amount that was, reallocated during the 90s, and I think, Department of Defense and other agencies are very wary about, making more spectrum available. But there's this constant fight in Washington about, well, how much is there? How much could be made available from the federal government spectrum? And so there's kind of a constant refrain of we need to inventory federal government spectrum. But that hasn't yielded much in the way of deliverables, and the reason is it's just it's a very difficult process, for a number of reasons. But I think unlicensed is going to play a huge part, especially if you look at some of the cable companies, which they sold a lot of their spectrum to Verizon,
yeah.
and now they're going big into and have been into Wi-Fi, to create have another platform, a wireless platform for different devices, for all their products, both video and otherwise.
Yeah.
And so it's an important piece of the pie.
Yeah, obviously, yeah, that'll be a big part. And if it comes to 600 megahertz, I mean, I know there's a lot of desire to get as much money as possible out of 600 megahertz. So giving away some of that for unlicensed might be a tricky proposition there when it comes to FirstNet funding and stuff too. But yeah, maybe from Bill, I guess your view on kind of how the market's kind of dealing with unlicensed right now. I mean, obviously, carriers have always had kind of a arm's length deal with unlicensed spectrum. With more coming to market, what's your kind of general view of how that might impact carrier plans?
I think from the unlicensed viewpoint, it's kind of Wi-Fi in the near term that has been good offload, and carriers care about license more, obviously, because they can control it. They can give the quality of service experience that people want to pay for. But unlicensed is interesting simply because it's unlicensed. You and I can have Wi-Fi routers, but cable Wi-Fi, the cable consortium, is monetizing it. AT&T is monetizing it for in stadiums and things like that. So unlicensed will, I think, it's a business model. If it ain't broke, don't play around with it. It will continue to monetize in the ways that we know now. So getting more of that, because if people are using data more in the licensed stuff, imagine what it is on the unlicensed stuff, right? So from the demand standpoint, you need more of that stuff out there. And again, good for the ecosystem, because we're going to have more new routers and things like that.
Yeah, that's going to be a bit of a challenge. And obviously, when it comes to small cells, I think it's a pretty similar point of view too. I know Jeff mentioned the FCC is looking at using 3.5 for small cells, which it's kind of high up in the band, so it makes sense for a small cell, short range location type of thing. That seems to make a lot of sense. Jeff, does it seem like that 3.5 spectrum is kind of moving along at a good clip? Do you think it'll be something that might be freed up here in the short term, or what's kind of the long range view?
Yeah, it looks like they're looks like they're making real good progress on it, and I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't have, some sort of initiative going forward, in the spring time frame there. I'd like to go back to one of the things Bill said and kind of get his and yours as well, Dan. On the whole cable Wi-Fi push. I wondered to myself that they're going in it really more aggressively than the wireless carriers. On the one hand, for the wireless, it helps with the offload issue, but one wonders where the point of diminishing returns is, and maybe the cable guys have answered that question, because you wonder that if, because there are data caps, I guess, on most carriers, I guess even Sprint, I suppose, has its limits if you go above it. But if the cable guys push this so hard, and you've got these these data caps or limits, on phones, I wonder, and maybe Bill, you want to chime in here, is there a possibility that some of the the ARPU and data revenues could be under pressure, from the carriers, with the cable Wi-Fi proliferation?
So I'll weigh in. I'll be interested in hearing Dan's opinion too, because he too is an analyst. So the cable Wi-Fi stuff is, I think, by default, certain cable companies' wireless strategy, because if rewind back to the old pivot days where they partnered with Sprint, didn't really work out. People weren't really going to ditch their wireless service from another brand to a whole quadruple play. There are those who do it, but if you look at the cable Wi-Fi build out versus the traditional AT&T Wi-Fi group build out, the AT&T approach is hotspots. So it's hotspots of McDonald's, Barnes and Nobles, the old Starbucks and coffee shops. So that was kind of discrete, as opposed to the cable guys, which are kind of led by Cablevision. If those people look in those days, it was more of a wireless coverage. So it's not hotspots. It's having clouds and the ability to be kind of quasi-nomadic and mobile. You can go down the street and you can still be within coverage. So it's interesting because that's their strategy. Because if you try to hook up to it, it's going to be similar to if you go to the airport, a Boingo experience. Well, if you want an hour, pay this much, a day, this much. Okay, so you got that going. But the fact that they have a cellular coverage, and they've strung stuff probably on poles, and they've got right away in customer stuff, they could be a platform where they can kind of monetize that and offer, I guess, hosting for small cells for mobile carriers. So the enemy is also my friend if they can pay me money. So I mean that's not unique in today's business environment, but they have in certain cities, they have the ability to host small cells for the wireless operators.
Couldn't that also be? Go ahead.
No, you're good, Jeff.
Yeah, I was just wondering, couldn't it also be an opportunity for cable companies, even to monetize it just for advertising? Let's say if these, if these hotspots are around business areas where there's restaurants and so forth, the idea of knowing, that this is, where somebody is, could bring in maybe even some ad revenue, one would think there, because, the whole idea, is they're going to be at a place or in a location a lot of times of entertainment, and there might be other places close by as well.
Yeah, I think absolutely that is certainly a capability. But if you take a look, I just focus on where the big numbers come from. If you host and you have recurring revenue from wireless operators because they put their equipment on your poles and things like that, I think by far that's more stable recurring revenue than
I agree.
revenue.
Right.
That's
sure.
Dan, it's your turn. I want to hear what Dan says.
Yep.
I mean, yeah, I mean, the whole cable industry has definitely had a very unique position when it comes to wireless. I mean, yeah, I agree with you guys. I think, I think cable companies realize that they could not compete in the traditional wireless world. They have a lot of money, so they did buy some licenses. They dabbled here and there, but then they realized that this was not how they were going to make this work. They sold off their spectrum, which was smart. Get some of that money back, most of the money back, or if not all the money back. Uh, but yeah, I mean, the Wi-Fi place seems to be more up their alley. I mean, it seems like, again, these are content companies who are transmitting content. No matter, unless you have 100 megahertz of licensed spectrum, it's hard to really be a video transmitter company. So tapping into Wi-Fi seems like a great way to do that. There's not much of an issue of having to throw more money at spectrum all the time. So it seemed like it was a pretty smart play by them. To kind of focus on Wi-Fi, and again, with the carriers being somewhat arm's length with Wi-Fi for the most part, it seemed like a great opportunity for them to dive into. So yeah, I mean, it seemed like it's a smart move by them. I think it plays into their strengths more. It
Yep.
keeps them out
Yep.
directly with carriers. Again, and with the data cap thing, I mean, that's a great point of view. I mean, if carriers or if a cable company can now go to the customers and say, hey, you sign up for our Wi-Fi mobile service. There's no caps. You can download and stream all you want with us. Sign up for our cable package. We'll give you this. Where with the traditional wireless carriers, I mean, they're going to be having to rein in those data caps more and more as it goes along. So it seems like a smart move by the cable guys. I mean, it's
Yeah, I think it's brilliant, and I think it's not only there's another component to it as well, that there's kind of a stickiness that if you're able not to basically have your video product away from where you are. I mean, that's a value added in a market which is seeing a lot of pressure from over the top providers, and so that would be I would think the Wi-Fi component would be very helpful in trying to reduce churn among video subscribers. It would seem like a very strong kind of value-added proposition for subscribers, for cable subscribers, I would think.
Yeah, I concur wholeheartedly. So recall the term TV everywhere. This is, I think, a good segue to talk about that, because you take a look at Comcast, right? They're going to be doing away with set-top boxes, and their X1 product is basically a cloud-based DVR, or well, not DVR, but that function.
Yeah.
And to have free access and not having customers drain their mobile data buckets from carriers and having it through Wi-Fi, and because you're a member of Comcast, Time Warner, whatever, and having that access free and watching your content is part of the TV everywhere strategy. So it is part and parcel of it, and I think that if they build it and the platform's there, wholesale is an opportunity if it can be can be made to the mobile carriers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course all this is good, that the more Wi-Fi is also good for the edge players, because the more opportunity is also the more potential for eyeballs for all the the big edge players of the world, the Googles and Facebooks and Amazons and so forth. There's more than residual benefit for those players as well.
Yeah, and I guess what you were talking about, Bill, too, is if these cable guys are putting these Wi-Fi hotspots all over the place, a lot of this equipment now is coming with you could embed a small cell in there as well for backhaul or for whatever you want to do. So for cable companies, like you said, they could be I think they're already getting bigger and bigger into wired backhaul with their assets, but putting these up, it's another opportunity to do even wireless backhaul as well. So again, another revenue stream for them going forward too. So yeah, I mean. I'm not a big fan of the cable companies, but in this position, they are doing a pretty smart move by kind of getting out of the cellular industry and getting more into the unlicensed industry at this point. So.
Right. So when you deploy a small cell, two things you have to worry about is power and backhaul. Right. So if they have a pole that has facilities to bring back the data, as well as let's say, power over Ethernet or wherever the case may be, then you're golden.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, guys, we're just about out of time here. I definitely want to thank Bill Ho with 556 Ventures for joining us today. Bill, thanks so much. We appreciate that. And also Jeff Silva, who's a RCR Wireless alum who carried this magazine for a long time, and we are still reaping the benefits of that. But he's now with Global Medley Investors, or Advisors, I should say. So, Jeff, definitely appreciate the insight today. Thanks so much for that.
Thanks for having me.
Great. And again, thanks, Bill, for your time, too. And again, like I was saying earlier, we did do a webinar on this topic last week that you can find on our website at rcrwireless.com, and also a report on the topic as well. So please feel free to go to our website there and check those out for some more information. But again, guys, thanks so much for your time today. We appreciate it.